Hello, everybody. We are honored today to have with us Mr. Seymour Hersh. Now, this is a man of dignity and class and style and grace and information that's very important to know about and read about. He just came out with this article, How America Took Out the Nord Stream Pipeline. And if you click down below, you can read the whole article. Now, this is a Seymour Hersh who gained recognition when he came out and exposed the terrible My Lai massacre that happened in Vietnam. He's also the author of a number of great books, and he also is the guy, that one of his books is the Price of Power, Kissinger in the Nixon White House. And of course, he talks a lot about Nixon as well in a number of his books. He's the top of the top, a real man, that grew up without like these daddy's boys over here. He's a man that worked his way up and knows what it is. And what he said about journalism and the golden years are gone, it's so true. So here's Mr. Seymour Hersh to tell you about the Nord Stream pipeline, who did it, why, where and when, and much, much more. I'd like you to comment on this. This is quoting you. You said that you describe yourself as a reporter, quote, as a survivor of a golden age in journalism. You said it was a time when, quote, we did not have to compete with 24-hour news channels. Newspapers were awash with advertising revenue, and I was free to travel as much as I wanted. You went on to say you could reveal, quote, important and inconvenient truths. So that's a quote by you. Those days are gone, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Now you got, I don't know. We're talking about, I joined the New York Times. Well, I did the My Lai stuff in 1969, a year and a half after My Lai. And even then I had a hell of a time getting it published, but I got it published. And people picked it up and they weren't afraid to touch it. And, I'll tell you something about that story. Guys like you that served in Vietnam that ended up going into, let's say, the intelligence community. They were in the military and they went in, and let's say they were a generation. And some of these people, stay on a long time. If you retire and you become an annuitant, you're still in the job because you're very good at what you do and you care about it. I'm talking about deep inside. And so what it is, the guys that come to me or that I know are guys that saw firsthand what happened, didn't like it, went through it, and they're guys that took the oath of office when they became higher ranking people. You take an oath of office at higher levels. It's not to their boss or the colonel or the general, or it's not even to the president. It's to the Constitution. And those are the people I deal with. That actually, and they look me out sometimes. For the last 30, 40 years, I find people that have called me up and said, we better start talking because things are crazy here. But things were okay. The news business, I wrote maybe 150, 200 stories for the New York Times without a source named, just said a source said. I wrote about the CIA going after Allende. I wrote about the CIA spying on American civilians. I wrote about the CIA and the NSA trying to get a Russian submarine up from the bottom without naming a source. And into the paper it went because they knew me and they trusted me. And it's not that people don't know me and don't trust me. It's just that they don't want to hear it anymore. And I think Trump, CNN, NBC, and Fox, I felt it's been a pollutant because you're either like Fox or you're like the other side. And so there's no middle ground and they all hate each other. And CNN and MSNBC, if they can't get something about Trump on every day, now they're doing something about that kid from the congressman who lied about everything. He's a good story too. So they do that. There's no news anymore.
Yeah.
And then and when I was there busting stories in the 70s, like on Vietnam and Watergate in the afternoon, I'd go all day in a story. And I'm writing for a daily newspaper. And sometimes I had a good story going, and the public relations people, there was just a couple of people in the New York Times would call up and say, NBC or CBS wants to do it. And I said, what are you talking about? Go on, read it in the paper. They don't have to go on television about something. The idea of doing it. And now the idea of doing a story and not going on CNN or MSNBC, the yap about it, and now they're all getting paid probably more money from the cable companies than they do. And so you have a situation where cable comes in, they have no discernment. Something happens, they run, it's called a cron, they run a little thing, breaking news. Nobody checks anything, nobody looks at it, nobody spends a week on a story or a month on a story. And so when I come up with something like this, I've obviously spent 3, maybe more than that on it. I've done a lot of time on that story. And if you read it, you can see it because I've got all this detail about meetings.
I read it.
Well, yeah, of course. It's a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And I've done more stories about it. We use the Norwegians, and I did another story for Substack about how we use the Norwegians undercover in North Vietnam. Norwegians and us have been together in COVID ops. It's not just new. We went to Norway. Norwegians, they hate Russia. What worries me now is hating Russia and hating Putin and not liking China as is boxing us in. How are you going to get out of this mess? I'll tell you something. I do talk to people that see stuff, and I don't talk about I don't care about day-to-day intelligence, but the chances of the Ukrainian army beating the Russians, whether you like Russia or don't like Russia, the Russians in the Stalingrad, everybody knows about Stalingrad. They lost 20 million people in World War II. That's a lot of soldiers. They were losing in the last 3 or 4 days of Stalingrad. They were losing every 48 hours, 4 days. Every 4 hours, every day, 2,400 killed and wounded in the last couple of days, and they kept on going, and they beat the Nazis back. And so you can understand. Maybe you don't have to understand it, but they're very tough, and the regular army hasn't gone in yet. And unlike us, when we want more guns, when the president wants more, we put $113 billion in there already.
I know.
And I will tell you, by fall, when he decided to blow up the stuff in the pipeline, assuming you'll introduce me and tell something about the story. By that time, they was pretty sure that at best it was going to be a standoff, and a very expensive, killing a lot of people, a lot of money. And he was the whole point of blowing up the pipelines. I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand that. The whole point is the Germans, after World War II, they spent 10, 15 years trying to rape, murder, and mutilate and bomb everything in Europe. They leaned over backwards to get back in good graces. The Germans are not interested in rearming. That will make the French will go crazy. There was a lot of worry about the Germans being even in NATO back then, 50 years ago. And so the Germans don't, they'll put some money in, but they don't want to go in all the way in Ukraine. Particularly, it doesn't look like a winner. And NATO, a lot of the countries in NATO are saying, we're going to fork out more money to these guys. So the White House was worried about it in the fall. They learned it was going to be a tougher war than they thought. I'm sure they knew it before that, but that's the best guess I can get for what he did. And so Biden gave the go to blowing. We planted the bomb, C4. We planted them earlier in May or June. The CIA and other groups did, working with the Norwegians. We did what the president wanted. That's what they do for a living. And by fall, they thought, well, what's the reason of doing it anymore? They were initially assigned before Christmas of 2021, when Russia was building up on the. I remember they were building up in Belarus. I'm assuming your audience is. I've been told it's a good audience. They read and think. So the Russians spent a long time showing their cards, and in December, the White House organized a meeting, a very top secret meeting. That's in my story. A guy named Sullivan, Jake Sullivan.
Yep.
Who's no more than 2 or 3 times over his head, but at least 2, maybe 3. So Sullivan, he worked for Hillary. He was her lawyer, and he worked for a guy named Stowe Talbot, who's a friend of mine, but whose mission in life was to build up NATO and stick it to the Russians. Nothing. Look, don't misunderstand me. Putin did what he did was wacko, starting a war, the most bloody war since World War II. You cannot respect him for that. but you can't say he didn't have some provocation. He made a deal in 1990 to let the new Germany, the history is just, it's not unimportant. West Germany and East Germany merged. You know, we had a Cold War going. East Germany was in the Warsaw Pact, for God's sakes, and it was all over for the Russians in 89 and 90. Everything collapsed. Their economy collapsed. And so East Germany joined West Germany, and the new Germany wanted to go into NATO. Gorbachev was then the boss of the Russians. And he said, you could do it, but make a promise that you won't expand NATO to the east, up to our borders. And Russia always considered Ukraine to be a subcultural. It was just a big landmass that protected him from Western Europe that didn't like him. And just to give you an example, in 1932, there was a great famine. 22 million people in the Ukraine starved to death because Stalin took all the grain and moved it up to regular Russia. I mean, the treatment of the Ukrainians by the Russians has been horrible, and there's that factor too. But in any case, suddenly we're in a war with Russia. NATO's in a war with a no end, and if NATO and America want more bombs, we have to go to contractors. We have to go to one of the big defense industries. We have to make a contract that has to be lawyered, has to be a kill fee, has to be all this regulations, have to have investigators and people inspecting the process. When Putin wants to do arms, he controls the industry. He says, you guys stop making what you're making and make me more bombs. He's got, he's got total control of the industry. We did that in World War II. Remember the woman, all the women who went to work and they were turning out one ship a week. Remember that? Yep. And airplane after airplane.
Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter. You remember that?
I remember the song. It was for my time. We're going to take a break now. We've got a lot more going on. And this is why you subscribe to the Trends Journal.
Get the Trends Journal, the best investment you could make, because it's the best investment into your mind and it can change how you look at the world.
Over the last 30 years, Gerald Celente has been more accurate about predicting what would be happening than anyone else I'm aware of.
The Trends Journal is one of the greatest sources of information, and and it really is. You're predicting these things well ahead of time. I would encourage everyone to go grab the latest copy.
Been a Trends Journal subscriber for 20 years. I just have to commend you. What you guys have put together in your latest Trends Journal, there's nothing like this out there.
Sir, everything that you predicted about the economy, you were absolutely right. So I have followed you all this time. So please take a look at the Trends Journal.
You correctly forecast that the Fed would hike rates quite aggressively, correctly said that initially gold and silver would drop as the Fed starts to raise rate to 1.5% and above. When we spoke last, Bitcoin was around 49,000. You said you expect to drop, and if it drops below 30, 35, then it could really drop.
Trends Journal, which I would encourage people to go and check out. It's actually a 200-page document, pure data-driven analysis.
Gerald Celente, the top trends forecaster in the